Howie Silbiger.
Hey, stop that, sir. Not allowed.
Who are you and why are you in my studio?
My name is Jean Picard, and I am an officer in the first class and a sergeant in the thing in the office de langue française.
What word's no good?
The Howie.
I can't say Howie.
This is not kosher, sir.
Okay. Join me for the Silbiger Show.
No, not kosher either.
What?
This is not recognized.
What?
Dilbiger. Dilbiger is not a recognized word.
Okay. Join me on Sunday, 6 to 9 p.m., right here on Radio Shalom.
Sunday is no good either.
Hi, I'm Stan Asher, and if you like traveling and you'd like to hear about Jewish communities all over the world here on Radio Shalom, then join me at 3 o'clock on Sunday afternoon, where we'll travel to a different part of the world where there was, is, or will be a Jewish community.
We're back, live in studio with Samuel Azurzer in the business headquarters of Radio Shalom, 1650 AM in Montreal, with the Money and Business Show. You have questions about your personal finances? You need advice in making sound financial decisions? Samuel and his guests are ready to take your call at 514-738-4100, extension 200. And now, back to the Money and Business Show.
Thank you for tuning in on our show today. Today's topic is how U.S. tax rules can impact Americans in Canada, and what can Americans and Canadians need to do to avoid the wrath of Uncle Sam. And we have Nathan Farkas, a CPA licensed in New York, Quebec, and Ontario. Again, welcome.
Thank you, Sam.
Yeah, besides Fat Guy, I know you mentioned it before, is there anything else new that Americans in Canada should look out for?
Well, in 2013, a new tax comes into effect. Now, going around Canada, you hear people always talking about how America doesn't have a good medical system, everyone has to pay for it, you go bankrupt for it. Well, the Obama administration passed a law to help provide medical coverage to those.
The Obamacare, is that
exactly?
Okay.
So, however, they're also asking all American citizens around the world to pay for it.
How much?
The tax is 3.8% on investment income above certain limits.
So if you're making, let's say, $100,000 or whatever, you have to pay 3.8% going to the Obamacare tax.
No, if you're earning only $100,000, you're immune from it. The lowest level starts at $125,000, but this will affect married people, businessmen who have their own companies, and retired people.
That's why they don't like it, right? Is that it?
That's a major part of it. It's a good law for the poorer people in the United States, but for Americans outside the country...
But for most people, this will not make a large difference, would it? For most people?
No, for most people, it won't make a big difference. Why? Because most people do not earn $125,000 a year.
Okay, and what about the seniors? Will this affect the seniors?
Upper-class seniors might face this because the tax is going to be on investment income. And seniors who are living off pensions often have a lot of investment income coming to them.
So who are the most affected by this? Is it the ones who are making over, you just said, right?
Mostly
over
the
100
seniors and self-employed businessmen who take dividends out of their companies. And moreover, with this law, foreign tax credits are not available. So taxes paid in Canada cannot be used to offset like they would on normal taxes.
Do you like this Obamacare personally?
Personally?
Yeah.
It's a hard call. It's a good law for many of the poor people in the United States, but for the most part, people who have health insurance, it's not necessarily very helpful. When I was working in New York around the time it passed, my company's health insurance premiums went up from about $1,100 a month per person to $1,800.
That's a lot of money.
It's a big
difference. Yeah, it's a big chunk.
It's a big jump because the law is going to require companies to start insuring people who are high risk. And what happens when you have to start insuring people who are high risk?
So this is more of a socializing the U.S. What would we say, the medical system, like what we have here in Canada with the
right.
the Medicare.
People say that it's a step towards socialized medicine in the United States, kind of like most other countries in the free world.
I have a feeling you may not like the law because it hurts you personally, but there's so many Americans. We're looking at, 50 million Americans who don't have insurance?
For many of them,
am I right about that?
The number, I've heard that number bandied about in the media.
Yeah.
I don't know that it's the truth of it or not.
That's a lot of people without medical
It's a lot of people.
Insurance.
and this law will help them get health insurance when it is fully implemented in a couple of years.
So if you're making $125,000, that's what you'll be affected. Anything below that, you will not be affected. So far we have discussed what is required of the million Americans in Canada. Okay, but there are some Canadians who are not Americans who have to file in the U.S. as well, like the Snowbirds Canadians in the U.S. Many Canadian seniors spend, you know, that a large amount of time each year in Florida, Arizona, or other warm places in the U.S. So, Nathan, what do Canadians who spend the winter in the U.S. need to be aware of? That's a very important question I'm asking you because we have many listeners who do go to the U.S.
Well, the first thing to be aware of is to monitor the number of days you spend in the United States. Everyone has, under their tourist visas, you're allowed to be in the United States for about 180 days a year. But once you go over 122 days a year, you're now obligated to file a specific form with the IRS every year defining that you're not a resident.
Okay, so you have a visa limit, right, for 180 days. I just don't understand that the 122 is just... It's 122 or is it 180 days?
180 is the number of days a tourist is allowed to spend in the United States annually.
Okay, those are the snowbirds.
Right. Okay. But for tax purposes, anyone who spends
more than
122 days, you're obligated to file certain forms stating that you're not really a U.S. resident, even though the test would say you are. Now, for those who spend more than 183 days a year, you've now spent way too much time, but we still have a way of getting you out of paying taxes to the Americans.
That's where you come in.
Exactly. There's, under the Canada-U.S. tax treaty, you just have to file a treaty return stating why you're really a resident of Canada instead, not the United States.
I'm sure you have some stories where people call you and said, listen, I've been there for like 190 days. What should I do?
Actually, I've heard a story about someone who's a Canadian citizen, had to deal with this whole problem, and in the end, they went to a tiebreaker tribunal to determine whether he was a Canadian or a U.S. resident, and the kicker was he bought burial rights at a cemetery in Canada.
Burial?
That was the tiebreaker for someone as to whether they were a Canadian or U.S. resident.
Wow, what a story. So Nathan, what can Canadians do to avoid these type of rules? You know, the 180 days, 122 days. How can they avoid all this?
The best thing to do is to monitor the days you spend in the United States.
Because not everybody knows this. You know that. I mean, when you go to the States, you spend like 90 days. I mean, how would you know? I mean, in your right mind, hey, you're just vacationing, that you have to fill out a tax form.
You have to pay attention. A client of mine came up to me about a month ago when he found out all these rules. He was saying, I thought I had 180 days, which is exactly what his tourist visa allows.
Right, but it's really 122 days.
For tax purposes.
So what can they avoid? How can they avoid all this?
By spending less time in the United States, that's the best thing. If you can't, talk to me, and we'll fill out the paperwork needed to give you the extra days in the United States. It's not a big deal. If you fill out the paperwork in a timely manner, there won't be any penalties, just an exercise in paperwork.
That's all it is?
That's all.
So what is your website if somebody wants to go on the website?
My website is ustaxesincanada.com. And one other thing for Snowbirds, on my website, I have a calculator function which basically allows you to enter the number of days you spent in the United States over the past 3 years, and it will tell you what form you have to file, if you have to file any forms at all.
Oh, that's on your website?
It's on the website.
Let me just go over this again. If you spend more than 183 days in the current year in the U.S., is it still possible to avoid filing as a U.S. resident?
It is.
Is that a good question to ask? That's
a very good question, because what you have to do is that...
This is what I'm trying to figure out over here, if we can actually avoid...
Right, so what you have to do if you spent that many days, we have to file a treaty-based return. Use the Canada-U.S. tax treaty and the provisions in it for have a tiebreaker to see where someone really is a resident.
I like the burial spot in Canada. That's a classic. So what are the rules for investing in the U.S., either for rental properties, because I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who are invested, of other investments too as well?
Well, I was just speaking to a client earlier today, and he was telling me that he just bought a place in Orlando, and he wants to rent it out when he's not using it. So he basically said, we told him that he has to hire a managing agent to deal with it because he's not allowed to work in the United States. Also, when he buys and sells the property, there will be amounts withheld to ensure that he doesn't flee the country and not pay his taxes.
So do Canadians, so Canadians cannot actively manage property in the U.S.?
No, because actively
Why?
managing property is considered working. And if you don't have a work visa,
so
you're
you
not
need
allowed to work
you need
in the
a
United
US
States.
Okay, so you have to hire a company to do the property management, is that it?
Correct.
And that's because they don't have a working visa. You are deemed to be working if you are managing it.
Exactly. A Canadian tourist has to be a tourist. They're not allowed to earn money, except maybe from a casino.
Wow, so there's a lot of real estate rules out there. Any requirements of withholding out there?
Well, when you sell a property, the IRS is required to withhold 10% of the gross amount of the sale. And that means if you sold a property at a loss, you're still having a large amount
10%.
withheld, 10%.
So at a loss or at a gain, you still have to pay 10%.
You have to pay 10%. Now, you get the money back at the end of the year.
This is personal or income properties?
This is either.
Either, okay.
You have to basically you have the money withheld, and you file a tax return at the end of the year, and you get it back. But you lose the money up front.
And how do you get that back?
File a tax return. Yeah, just file a tax return showing that you had a loss or that your gain wasn't the entire amount sold for. Then you'll be taxed at the marginal rates for that year.
Good. Okay. We're going to go on a station break. Again, I'm with Nathan Farkas. Over here is a CPA licensed in New York, Ontario, and Quebec. Is that right?
That's right.
Again, my name is Samuel Izerza for the Money and Biz Show, Radio Shalom, CJRS 1650 AM in Montreal. We'll be right back in 2 minutes.